jumping, them boys up to something. They just spent like 2 or 3 weeks out the country. Them boys up to something, they just not just bluffing.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Free Academy Live. It's Jared Reyes here with Michael Fielding. We're super excited to have you. Michael's been traveling around, I guess, the southern part of the U.S., I like to say, make it a little broader, the U.S. on his book tour for his book, Sailboat Diaries. So I was going to let him take it away and tell us a little bit about what he's been up to for this book tour.
Yeah, it's been an awesome adventure. We started like last Saturday in Houston, did kind of a paired book release with Sally Anderson's 9 Lives of Catfire tour. That's her book she put out, and I was lucky to get to speak in Dallas at her book release at the Black Lodge. And from there, we kind of split off. Her tour went to New Orleans next, and me and my friend Sarah Royer went up to Dallas and Boulder, and Denver and Boulder, and all around Colorado, and went to some open mics and got to share my book and saw a bunch of amazing things. Meteor shower. Drove through a blizzard. Swim in a hot springs. All kinds of fun stuff. And then went back through Dallas, then over to Austin, checked in to the Austin Woods, and everything's still the same, which is crazy. And then back to Houston. Now I'm back at my parents' house in Katy. So it's been quite an adventure. 9 days, but it feels like a month because just every day was jam-packed full of new things. So it was really fun.
Subjective versus objective time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So who knows?
It was cool stretching it out, and I hadn't written anything down like in my journal the whole time, and then today I went back and like filled everything in, and it's just like, wow, we did so much cool stuff in so little time. It was crazy.
So you came back down, you're home for the holidays, you're gonna head out to California with your family for a family trip, and then you're gonna stay behind even though they're gonna come back to Katy, Texas. And you're gonna stay in California for a bit, make your way down to Reno and continue trying to sell your book and whatnot.
Yeah, so that's my latest plan. We're going out to Desert Springs. So they're going to fly out of LAX, and I'm just going to stay in LA and try to couch surf and hit up some like open mics and bookstores and spread some more Sailboat Diaries stuff. And then I'm going to travel up to San Francisco by Megabus, which I got for $1, to hang out with Tyler Olson and try to plan another book kind of event up there, hang out for a week in San Francisco, then over to Reno. Not sure how long I'll hang out there. And my latest plan is tentatively to like fly out to Arizona and help a friend, Adam Kokesh, to build a Earthship. I've only met him like once, but he was putting out the call for volunteers last spring, I guess, but finally getting around to building his Earthship. So I thought that'd be a great kind of way to meet another liberty-minded person and get to hang out a bit and also learn a lot about, building Earthships and kind of using natural materials to build houses. And then we're both going to Anarchapulco, so I was thinking maybe just hang out in Arizona all the way till it's time to fly down to Acapulco, or maybe drive. I'm not sure which way I'm getting down there yet, but that'll be February 19th through 21st in Acapulco, Mexico. I'll be speaking at Anarchapulco, and after that, it's totally open-ended, so I'm not sure yet, but that's kind of exciting.
No, that's awesome, and I'm really interested to join you, especially I want to, if you end up going to the Earthship thing, or whether or not you go or not, I'm really intrigued to maybe jump on and try and help with the Earthship thing, because that's just so fascinating to me, and it's a goal of mine to live in a house at some point that I build with my own hands. And I think I could already do it, on a basic level out of wood or more standard materials or contemporary materials. But I was reading up or watching a lot of YouTube videos on Earthships. Well, not a lot. I watched a few videos on Earthships, and it looked amazing. I mean, the structures that people are building, with the most basic things like cans, bottles, tires. Like, it was so impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. All about recycling materials. And I feel like we tried to do that in the woods. You know, we collected bottles. We just never got to the point where we put them in place and made a wall or whatever. We got the bottle collecting part down.
Yeah, we were good at collecting materials, not always so good at actually putting them to work somewhere. But
Yeah.
we did
Well,
like to take things that are spread apart and pile them into one spot, leave them there.
consolidation. Yeah, we're good at that.
Uh,
Um,
well, that's awesome, man. Yeah, so interested in that. I want to make it to Anarchapulco. Don't know if I will or not. You're saying you're more tempted to fly in potentially, or what were you saying?
I keep going back and forth. So I was thinking about getting, a kind of small SUV to kind of live out of and drive down there, and then maybe hang out in Mexico for a little while before and after. Maybe keep going down through Central America to Colombia and Chile. But see, my other plan is to go to Japan and New Zealand, and it's all a big mix of things I want to do at this point. But I don't know. I guess it depends where my money's at, and I'm leaving my options open at this point. I'm not settling on one course or the other yet. So we'll see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, well, I really want to get to New Zealand, and Daniel, and see Sean. I brought it up in episode 2 with Sean, saying that we all kind of talked about trying to reconvene in New Zealand for a little bit. But I know Daniel's goal is once he finishes massage therapy school to try and make his way to New Zealand. You had talked about getting over there sometimes.
Definitely.
I'd love to.
Um, so yeah, I might go right after Anarchapulco. But I feel like definitely by the spring or summer I'll make it over there. Just not sure when exactly yet.
Yeah, I think for
But
me, maybe around May is a more realistic timeline for me to potentially get over there. But I mean, I don't really have anything set in stone at this point as far as what I'm doing over the next few months. But just to get the money together and everything, and because I want to be able to go and it be open ended, so just get all my affairs tied up in a nice little bow.
yeah, speaking of that, that reminds me of some of our land use talks and how having a different perspective on land use can really open lots of doors. And I've already been kind of scanning satellite images of Acapulco, and I think when I go down there, I think I'm just gonna try to squat for a few days while I'm there, or like a week or however long. I found this unused land just looking at satellite pictures really close to the hotel where the conference is being held. So I figure I'll just go and pop up a tent or a hammock and not spend any money on housing while I'm there, and kind of explore this idea of using unused land like all around the world. Because I mean, so far I've done it in the Bahamas a little bit, and then in Texas, in Houston and Austin. But my gut instinct is that it can be done anywhere. But I want to keep testing it. I want to push the frontier and demonstrate both to myself and to the rest of the world that there is a lot. At this point, I think there's a lot of unused land that could easily be inhabited, and I want to test it out and see if that's really true or not.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up, when I lived in the woods with you in our Austin Taz, there's so many questions and from like a moral standpoint that I think putting yourself in a living arrangement like that causes to become relevant. And the biggest one is I think that obviously our whole basis for being there came down to our view of property rights, or at least maybe we don't have an established view yet, but our questioning of whatever the current paradigm is, the fact this idea that someone who owns the title and therefore, at least in the US's eyes, legally owns a piece of land, but isn't utilizing it. Where is it? At what point is it okay to inhabit that land? Especially with the notion that you're not affecting it. Any changes you make to the land are so trivial to the land's worth or potential use later and whatnot. And I feel like we put that to the test. And I don't know, it raised a lot more questions than I think I have answers to at this point, other than the fact that I just know my gut feeling is nothing that we are occupying that land here in Austin. Nothing about that felt wrong to me. I don't think I've negatively affected anyone else's lives. So I can look back on that and pretty happily say that that was a moral action in my mind. But I don't know what circumstances where all of a sudden in my head, my gut would say this feels immoral. And that's like the hardest thing I've been trying to identify is, well, in our scenario, a corporation owned it. They'd owned it for 20 years, 15, 20 years, according to tax records, had never utilized it for anything. It felt pretty obvious that we weren't negatively affecting an individual. I don't know where the point is where all of a sudden I would feel that I was negatively affecting someone else in a way that should be, at least in my own eyes, immoral.
Yeah, probably when somebody starts yelling at you, I would imagine, like,
Well,
hey man, what are
well,
you
Tokyo,
doing? Get off my land.
well, Tokyo could have yelled at us, and I still wouldn't have been like, I wouldn't have felt it was immoral. Like, not Tokyo, but like an employee of Tokyo could have yelled at us, and I still would
Yeah,
like it was immoral.
yeah, not. That's, I guess, step one. And then step two is like them telling you exactly how you are hurting them, I guess. I mean, that's the only answer I ever have is like it has to be situational, like case by case. You have to go look at the physical piece of land, look around, see who's there, who might have any parent interest, and you quickly will find out if you're messing up somebody's life, like they're gonna let you know if you're negatively impacting them. So I like the old test the waters, and it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission kind of idea.
Do
Like,
you think that's a
what?
good, is that a good standard in other walks of life too, or are you just making that conveniently about your interest in squatting?
Let me think. Well, I guess with theft, that's kind of a bad one. If it's clear I'm gonna hurt someone, then I wouldn't do it. But if it's not clear that somebody might or might not suffer, then I might just test the waters and see. I like the baby step approach, like I'm not gonna go onto unused land and just build a castle day one. I might camp day one, and then if somebody has a problem with it, they'll probably come talk to me. And if I camp for a little bit and nobody says anything and I can't tell that I'm hurting anybody, then maybe I'll build a little bit bigger structure, and start taking more stuff out there. And if we keep doing that and nobody says anything and still can't tell that I'm hurting anybody, then, you just keep building bigger and bigger. And if nobody says anything after 6 months, then I feel like you've got a pretty good claim to that piece of land, or at least pretty good evidence that you're not hurting anyone by being there, which is more important than having a good claim.
Yeah, I think we went and talked at a Brave New Books, the bookstore here in Austin, Texas, during one of their open mics, and both touched on some of the questions that have come up regarding property from our hands-on time, our time being hands-on in questioning the current paradigm. And I still don't have all the answers. I think one of the big things I thought is, well, what causes people to have a desire to own something in the sense that we're familiar with it? So like I think there's kind of two things. One is I think people don't want to have reoccurring payments on an item to infinity, or till death. So they want to at some point not have to continue paying money to utilize it. And at the other thing I think is oftentimes they want exclusive rights to utilizing whatever object we're talking about. So if it's land, not only do they want to not have to pay on it forever like they're renting it, but they also, for whatever reason, want other people to not be able to use that item or that land. And I think what I realized is in a lot of cases, I'm incredibly interested in the first one, in that I don't want to pay reoccurring payments like I'm renting something. But I'm not always, I don't care as much in every circumstance about the second one, which is that I don't always care to have exclusive rights, I think. And we were kind of testing our boundary with that. Here in Austin, I don't care if in fact, we were trying to get other people to utilize that land with us. But as someone brought up, well, what about your tent? While you're using your tent, at what point do you say, well, I don't really want a stranger hanging out in my tent when I'm actively using it? I may be gone for a few hours, but I don't want, while I'm gone for a few hours, to come back and there to be 6 people in there that I don't know. So everything's got this scale to it, but if using common sense and whatnot, I think in that instance, I really didn't have a lot of interest in the second one being, I didn't really care who else utilized it while we were out there.
Yeah, one of the interesting things you touched on just now was you said you wouldn't want 6 people in your tent, but you didn't say there shouldn't be 6 people in your tent. And there's this interesting difference between saying like what ought to be the case and what is a personal preference.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed in my personal life that consciously choosing to talk about my preferences rather than the way things ought to be has really just clearly helped me see exactly what I can affect and what is just kind of an illusion that we're talking about. Like what should be the case, like should according to who? Like people use the words like it's supposed to be this way, or it ought to be like this. But whose opinion are we talking about? But when we take it into the personal stance of I don't want people in my tent, then you can take steps to prevent it from happening. Or, you can just look out there. Like the step we actually took was hiding the tent so far that nobody went out there. That was the only step we had to take.
Yeah.
But if it was a bigger deal to you, you could put up fences or, figure out some way of protecting it better. But what should or should not be the case is just, I feel like it's almost a distraction from, what we can actually accomplish with our lives. And so I appreciate you using that terminology, that phrase of you didn't want 6 people in your tent,
Yeah.
but we can't say whether or not there should be 6 people in your tent when you get home.
Yeah, I mean, and because I mean, that's what we did. We would be out there and we would see other things that looked abandoned, and we kind of watch it for a while. And if it appeared to be abandoned, I think homeless culture appeared to be, if it seems abandoned and you've been eyeing it for a while and it hasn't moved, it doesn't look like it's been used, that it's fair game. And in that sense, it didn't feel like theft. It felt like we were just utilizing or recycling someone else's abandoned, possessions. And it was, other people who had been camping in the same plot of woods that we were staying in. But I think the idea of coming home back to a tent and seeing other people in there, it's very likely they could have, kind of similar boat. How when you approach an object for the first time, you can't tell immediately if someone's actively using it or not. So to jump immediately to this idea that they did something wrong would be strange, because for all they knew, that was an abandoned tent in the woods, and why not utilize it? It seems to make more sense than to let it go to waste. But
yeah, definitely, that's a great point. And speaking of that, it's so interesting that Christian has actually been in your tent for like 4 months now.
Yeah, so the cool thing is, Michael and I were living in, utilizing this patch of woods in Austin for both about 5 months, and then for various reasons, we're not so active on this patch of land anymore. But I left my tent out there and things like that. I didn't really mind leaving it, and I had this view that we had put in so much work making the trails and building up the campsite, that to see it go abandoned was a far more sad outcome than if we could find someone, or someone found it on their own and started utilizing it. And we actually ended up meeting someone who now lives in my tent, or his tent. It's his tent now. I don't have any desire to have it back, and I'm on using it right now. So in my eyes, it's his tent. I assume if I needed it for a night, I could text him and say, hey, I want to stay in the tent tonight. Is that But no, that's awesome. Yeah, no, we kind of got to hand the keys over to someone else who was going to use it, and it just makes I don't have to have that sense that we put in all that effort and it's kind of going unused. Now someone's out there, and it's so cool. He's in my tent, and then we talked, and he was like, "Yeah, we had talked when we, your book release. We had talked about going back to the woods, and he's like." Just so you know, the tent's really messy. I haven't got to clean it. It's kind of muddy. Like, oh man, that's your tent. Like you don't have to explain anything to me. That's yours.
Yeah, super funny. It looks a little messy out there. I don't know. He said taking your blankets and stuff out and put them under the kitchen, but and there was another tent on the trampoline, which I didn't recognize, so I don't know where that was from, but it was kind of collapsed, so I don't know. Somebody's using it though, so that's cool.
Is Christian? Is he still out there? Like, he's still using that as his main homestead, I guess.
I think so. I Facebook messaged him and he said that he was out there still, but then I went out there and I didn't meet up with him in person, so didn't get to talk to him too much. But yeah, seems like it's still being used.
Yeah, I mean, so it's so fascinating. Like, and this is the question I kept asking myself, and I think it's just got to be a gut thing, as far as what sort of situation would I end up encountering where I'm utilizing land, and I felt in retrospect it was an immoral action. And I don't have an answer. I think it's just something I'd have to stick my toes in the water and just see if I feel like I'm affecting anyone. And I think there's a way to do that. You can stick your toes in the water, and some people will say that's already, I think the common idea is, well, just for trespassing to begin with.
Trespasser, you can get shot.
Yeah, and it's like, I think there's a way to test it out and be very respectful for the piece of land, and you can easily put a tent up one night, leave the next night, and there be basically no evidence you were there. I mean, it just seems more simple than, I don't know, everything that people go through to try and protect things that they're not even using. It's much more simple than that, I think.
Yeah, and that kind of draws back to why people want to own things to begin with. And I think one of the big ones is they want to sell it someday. And
acquire wealth.
yeah, that part it's so tricky because I mean it makes sense if you find a good piece of land and you build a nice structure on it, and then you want to leave someday, why shouldn't you be able to sell it to somebody else? But on the other hand, it feels really tricky, especially with unused land, just buying a tract of land. And what even makes the first person own it? That's the question I keep going back to because okay, so at some point some court drew some boxes over a map of the earth and said, here's number 751723334 and we're going to sell it to Mr. John, and what, he gets to sell it just because they said it on the piece of paper? Like, they just made that up. That doesn't make any sense. I feel like you have to put some effort in to like demonstrate that you have a legitimate claim to this piece of land. And I don't think just because the courthouse has it down on record that this guy sold it to this guy, sold it to this guy, and now this guy owns it, that doesn't mean anything to me. That's just some words on paper. Like, where is the actual evidence in real life to show me that I'm going to hurt somebody by using this piece of land? And it's almost always if there's no improvement, if there's nothing built, then why should I believe that the person who legally owns it legitimately owns it? And I just don't think that's usually the case.
Yeah, and totally lost my train of thought there, actually. But I guess what I was gonna say is, people treat we keep talking about, okay, the court has it written down on a piece of paper, and people view that as the objective truth about who owns it. When you pointed out, from the get-go, that the onset of that sheet of paper was an arbitrary decision, that was made by
some human.
The people in power, like some people arbitrarily drew this grid and then enforced it. But on top of the fact that it was arbitrary to begin with, the way people talk about the title system as if it's a objective is flawed for another reason, because there's title disputes all the time. So even this supposedly objective record of who owns something, especially regarding land or a home, is very, very, I mean, it's just not objective. There's issues and errors on it constantly. That's why title insurance is a thing, because it's so prevalent that multiple people think they own the same thing, that people pay to insure in case that happens, that they're not screwed out of, you know, their investment or the money they paid to get that item. So even the supposedly objective record is very unobjective, even by its own standards.
Yeah, and I mean that's just great reason I think for us to push more into decentralization and just accepting the fact that there will always be property disputes. Like that's never ever going to end until humanity goes extinct. People are going to disagree over who owns what. And the way to fix that system, I don't think, is to try to make a more objective, like more rigorous, more formal piece of paper. Like, I think the way to fix it is to improve our dispute resolution skills and the way humans resolve conflicts. And I think that's a deep issue to solve, and that will have wider repercussions than just the title system. But I feel like that's the root of the issue, is the way we've learned to resolve problems. And a lot of it, I think, draws from the public education system, where we're told year after year that there are objective answers. And if you have a question, you go to the authority and they'll tell you the answer. And that's just not the way real life works. Real life is more about meeting on a peer-to-peer basis and negotiating our futures together, not asking the person on the big chair like to come up with an answer for us, but making our own answers. And I don't know. I'm excited to move forward in that direction with humanity, but it is a bit of a bummer how prevalent the this belief in like objective authoritative answers on property is, and that's going to be tough to break free of, I do think. So we got some work cut out for us.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a really, I mean, it's a really smart observation, is just this idea that there's such a dependence on authority figures or so-called experts for everything, when, you know, people who are experts in certain fields are still just as flawed as the rest of us. They still suffer from getting attached to some of their ideas, you know, and so having this, basically, I just think we overestimate or have too much confidence in experts or authority figures to make the right decisions. And what is the right decision? That's an individual basis to begin with. But it is funny how, you know, everything we're taught, like you mentioned, it's very there's a hierarchy to it, and we always turn to the person above us as if they aren't just a human with flaws and their own agendas and whatnot. They somehow, because they have this higher position, they know objective truth that we somehow don't know on our own. I think the problem that most people will have when you know, I end up getting in conversations about anarchy or just even not even to that extreme, but just talking about authority figures or my distrust, or this idea that I don't think we need that sort of organizational structure for society. What comes up is I think people have this really hard time with the idea that there isn't objective truth, though. Like when you talk about, people say, no, we need to know definitively this is okay, this isn't. And I think, as you said, a lot of that's probably because we're taught that way growing up in schools. There's always a correct answer. There's an objective version of history, as if people with their own subjective minds and perspectives aren't the ones who viewed whatever happened and then wrote it down in their own subjective way. You know, we still view history as the subjective thing, which is crazy. And I still do it. Mentally, it's hard for me at times to break the habit of just assuming history, there was an objective version of history. But I think right now, I don't know how we get to a point where people are more open to this free-flowing, fluid decision-making, because it's so hard for people to fathom how can one go through life and not know right and wrong, or what is and what isn't. I think it scares people. They're terrified of this idea that there could be a dispute, and there's no obvious answer as to who's right.
Yeah, and I think that it comes down to people's pictures of how the self works. And a lot of people have this idea of a continuous self. Like, I am Michael Fielding, and Michael Fielding is a person who exists, from birth till death. And that kind of mindset traps you in a way of thinking where you're not predicting large changes in yourself. So you're not prepared for handling things on a case by case basis, or deciding things based on the situation at hand. um, Versus I have found personally just this view of myself as a constantly evolving, constantly changing process rather than a thing, to be hugely fulfilling, especially in making me more comfortable with handling things on a case by case basis, and realizing, like, I'm not going to have to do things in the future. That's my future self, and he's going to have all the information he needs to make the decision in the moment when the decision needs to be made. But right now, I don't need to worry about those things, and just being able to defer my decision making to my future self, and just, yeah, being willing to go with the flow and make it up as I go and improvise and everything. And um, I think they all tie in together. This idea of the property being subjective and the self being discontinuous, like emerging on a day by day basis, and just the willingness to resolve disputes. They all kind of play on each other in this cool little. It's like a different perspective, but they all fit amongst each other in that perspective. In the same way that, like, the continuous self and the rigid property rights and the defined, like, interactions, those kind of fit together in a mold. But when you look closely at that kind of rigid mold, things break down, like, at the edges, is what I've noticed. And with the free flowing kind of improvisational mindset, um, that's just not as big of a problem, because I know that I'm flawed and I'm going to learn and I'm going to improve and I'm going to be able to handle situations as they come up. So I've definitely learned to appreciate living in the moment, I guess.
Yeah, and that's I think that's so hard for people to feel comfortable with. I know, again, with how I'm choosing to spend my time on a day-to-day basis, what I'm choosing to do with my life so far, it's caused confusion amongst some of the people around me, and a lot of that's based on the fact that I don't have a plan. And what I was talking about with Sean in episode 2, part of the conversation was about how I don't have a plan for what I want for 2016, and like have these specific goals, but I do, as far as my life goes. I have this main idea or theme of what I want to get out of my life, or what I want my life to represent, or almost like the topic of an art contest, where my life is the art, and I know what the topic is, or the idea I wanted to convey, and things that fit that is what I'm choosing to do on a daily basis, weekly basis, or whatever. But I don't know what, I barely know what I'm going to do 2 days from now. I mean, I do, 'cause it's Christmas, but, I really don't know. And I find that people even struggle with me not knowing. It doesn't even have to be their own personal situation that's unplanned, that could bother them. They'll even be bothered by the fact that I don't have a plan for my situation. And I don't know, I think you brought up a good point with the idea that, people joke about, and it's a negative thing when they say, oh, Jared changed, as if, or Michael changed, or some Drake changed, whoever, like, as if we're not all changing, or as if change is bad. And it's the same thing where you see people are I think a lot of people have this really strong fear of change, which is a strange fear to have because everything in life changes. We age, we get old, we die. Like plants die. Everything has a cycle. The idea that somehow you can organize your life to where things don't change is crazy. So I don't understand why we're so fearful of it and why we don't embrace it, because it's this unstoppable force, and to fight it is probably, I think, why a lot of people struggle to find happiness, is because planning is incredibly difficult, and things rarely ever go to a plan. And I think maybe, as you said, I think all these ideas are kind of codependent on one another. They fit together or they don't. And I don't. It just fascinates me that my lack of a plan can bother someone else.
Yeah, I have a hypothesis that is probably they're seeing a lack of fear in you about not having a plan, and that's allowing them to see one of their own fears in themselves, which is the fear of not having a plan. And they're probably that's what makes them uncomfortable is seeing their own fear, because usually it's hidden because usually they're interacting with others who also have that fear and also hide it, so nobody brings it up, that we don't have a plan. Like, we're winging it, guys. Like,
What are we doing?
but when you bring it up and you're so calm and acting like it's normal to not have a plan, they're like, oh wait, should I have a plan? What am I doing? Like, and it just I think it a lot of times people and then they take that fear and it gets projected into anger at you often. Like Yoda says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate to suffering. So let's try not to be scared, I think is the key point of Star Wars.
Well, and then you posted a thing about and I've seen other people post it about basically what the plot is, which is kind of a horrific. I mean, I haven't seen that new one. No one comment on this video telling me what happens in the latest Star Wars, please. But it just as a reference to the previous 6 Star Wars films. The plot of that's actually pretty horrific when you look at it at a macro level.
Yeah.
Here,
Orphan boy indoctrinated with ancient religion leads a terror attack on a military base with like 300,000 people on it, killing them all, and the emperor. So, and people cheer at the end because they play the music. Bum, 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 bum,
yeah,
bum, bum. It sounds like a good thing all of a sudden. So we just need to play music during the suicide attacks, and people will be happier.
what is crazy, I noticed this when I started editing films for the first time back in college when Scott and I were just making stupid films. You could take the same, like let's say you film a conversation or anything. You could film a squirrel eating, a nut by a tree or whatever, right? And there's no music. And the same footage, when you put a different song to it, takes on a totally different meaning. Like the music behind a scene, footage or whatever, can have such a crazy impact. Like I could make the picture, the short video of a squirrel eating a nut. If I put sad music behind it, all of a sudden this becomes an incredibly sad moment. I could put triumphant music behind it and it becomes funny, like the squirrel's triumphant for eating this nut or what. It's so silly or crazy how footage can be really neutral from an emotional standpoint until you add this extra nuance of music. So I think maybe that's the problem with anarchy, is we just don't have enough pleasant music that we're putting behind our.
That's funny. Actually, I listened to this awesome symphony from like the 1700s, and it was in honor of the storming of the Bastille, which is the prison in France that when they stormed it, they kind of started the French Revolution. And I think it was way later. This guy wrote a symphony about it, but it was pretty awesome. So we should totally use that in one of our anarchy videos someday.
I'm game. I'm not. So I got the GoPro and I've been just taking random stupid footage with it. But I'm gonna make a little Apple's anarchy video.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, just the musings of Apple. Mainly just her watching squirrels and licking herself and jumping for no apparent reason and eating what dogs do. She operates and she barely listens to me. She's got her own. She listens to me when she wants, and when she doesn't, she doesn't. And she's got her own little anarchy going on, and I'm happy with it. She seems to be pleased with it. So
What a lucky pup. Total freedom.
I'm not totally lucky. I mean, she's still a little bit of a slave. You know, she's stuck in the house sometimes when she doesn't want to be, and she would chase more squirrels if I wasn't such a douchebag dictator. But I'm trying to get better and use her as, you know, a little experiment.
Let's lead a coup against Jared. An apple.
Really hard. You literally just have to open the door and let her out. Although she comes back, she goes on walks by herself sometimes. She'll be gone for like 25 minutes, and then she comes back and scratches on the back door.
She read the Fugitive Slave Act.
She thought she was going to get returned. She doesn't even have a collar or she doesn't have anything with name or anything on it. So I mean, she didn't have to come back. Even the Fugitive Slave Act, you have to know who to take them back to, and I haven't branded her yet, so she should be good.
Oh no.
Well, awesome. Well, I think we touched on a lot of cool stuff about property and about sense of self. That was interesting, I guess, correlation or connecting of those two concepts. And I think we're both going to continue testing the boundaries of property and who knows, and freedom. I have no idea what I'm going to do post Christmas, so I'm sure I'm going to answer a lot of questions for my family now that I'm not moving to Vancouver. So they're gonna be like, "What do you do now?" And I'm gonna be like, "I don't know." See, that's a good example of planning. See, I didn't really plan that hard, but I thought I was gonna move to Vancouver, and that fell through. And that's just that's why I didn't get so wrapped up in this plan concept. It makes it so much easier to let go of an idea or a potential life chapter when everything's, you just kind of wing it. It's just so much easier to move on and I don't know, to be happy, because I don't know. Some people get so wrapped up in what they wanted to have happen. If that one thing doesn't happen, it's totally devastating. And I was excited to go to Canada, but I'm kind of excited to not go to Canada and have the freedom to do some trips in between that. If I was wrapped up in a business, I probably wouldn't have been able to be a part of.
Yeah, speaking of that, I got a book idea. I want to talk to you after the show. But if you're good, let's close it out and tell everybody peace till next time.
All right. Peace, love, and anarchy. Let's get out of here.
See you guys.